episode of the BioHub. Today, we're delighted to welcome Nolan Townsend, a seasoned biotech leader and the CEO of Lexeo Therapeutics. With a background that spans investment banking and executive leadership at Pfizer, where Nolan led the rare disease division globally, Nolan brings a unique blend of financial insight and clinical innovation. Lexeo Therapeutics are a clinical stage biotech based in New York, focused on improving heart health by using cutting-edge science to change how we treat genetic heart diseases. So join us today as we'll talk through Nolan's journey, Lexeo's pipeline, as well as what's next for Lexeo Therapeutics. So Nolan, thanks so much for coming on. How are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. So thanks for helping us out. So look, let's start with a little bit about yourself then. So you began your career in healthcare finance before transitioning into leadership roles at Pfizer and now Lexeo. What drew you into the life sciences industry and what inspired you to join Lexeo as CEO?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in general, I felt that one of humankind's greatest innovations is the ability to, extend our own lives with technology. And imagine being able to package this technology into a pill or into a vial. The concept of that was very attractive to me. I see it as, the type of industry that would always exist. I think humankind wants to live longer, wants to live healthier lives, and this is the industry that's delivering solutions to that challenge. So as we evolve as a species. We'll always find some new disease, some new challenge from a healthcare perspective that we're seeking to address. And I think therapeutics are, the most efficient way to address the challenges of extending life. So that's what drew me to the industry in general. I started my career in finance. Maybe it's because of where I went to undergraduate. I went to University of Pennsylvania. It has a very strong sort of finance, flow from Penn to New York and so on. And I worked in corporate finance and then later in healthcare investment banking. And as I, was in investment banking, I worked on, various transactions. And I saw that, a lot of the decision makers for the transaction itself and the individuals that were responsible for, realizing the full value of whatever that transaction was, were some of the, operating executives or general managers, the CEOs of the companies that we were, working with. So that was one, important exposure or learning for me was that dynamic. I also, for my graduate education, went to Harvard Business School, which is a general management school. So, you hear a lot from, CEOs, in that context. A lot of the case studies that we would spend time with at Harvard Business School, the protagonist of the case is our CEO. So you get to see things, from the vantage point of a CEO. And I think you have a full understanding of the complexity of the role. And also the impact that such a role can have on organizations, on industries, and so on. So, leaving investment banking, I took a path, working at Pfizer towards, more general management or operating roles that led to a, successive stream of general management roles, both in and outside of the U.S., the last few of which, as you mentioned, were in Pfizer's rare disease business, which actually exposed me to the potential of genetic medicines and the impact of treating complex rare diseases with high unmet need. And so I think this was a lot of the backdrop for the formation of Lexeo and the focus of the company. And I think that's an important aspect of the work that we're doing across the biotechnology industry.
Yeah. Good. And just a little bit into Lexeo then. So I guess the company has evolved since its founding, expanding from a gene therapy focused company into a broader clinical stage biotech. How has the company's mission and scientific vision changed under your leadership, and how has the pipeline matured as a result of that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. We're almost a 6-year-old company now. If you look back at our first, press releases, you would see that we had an option to 18 different gene therapies, and these sat across 5 different therapeutic areas. So that was, the pipeline we theoretically had access to at the outset of the company. At that time, we decided to focus primarily on cardiac and central nervous system diseases. We did not spend much time on some of the other disease areas. And then, more recently have even further narrowed our focus to cardiac. And I think there's a few things that sit behind that. Admittedly, one of them is the capital markets environment. I think it forces companies to really focus on, the programs with the highest probability of success that will have the highest impact for patients. But what that also implies, when I mention high probability of success, is focusing on places where you can demonstrate the value of the program, both to patients, payers, investors, and so on, on a more rapid time frame. So this would mean focusing on diseases where maybe the biology is more well understood. This means focusing on diseases where you can demonstrate, for example, tissue transduction via tissue samples. You could take a tissue sample of the heart, for example. You cannot take a tissue sample of the brain, where the biomarkers for the disease are well understood, where there may be regulatory pathways that are more clearly defined. So I think that's, the kind of series of considerations that in part led us to focus on cardiac. But the other side of it is just the degree of unmet need. I mean, today there were, fewer than 10 cardiac precision medicines that have been approved. There's a reason for that. I think historically the FDA has required cardiovascular outcome studies with hard endpoints to support the approval of cardiovascular treatments. But this has been evolving over the past few years, and the FDA has become open to biomarker-based endpoints, which open the door to rare and precision medicines in cardiovascular disease. Myself and a few members of our management team and broader team at Lexeo had the opportunity to lead the launch of, I think, one of the first cardiovascular rare disease treatments at Pfizer. This was tafamidis for the treatment of TTR amyloid cardiomyopathy. And I think this really opened our eyes and frankly the eyes of the entire biotechnology industry to the potential of cardiac rare disease treatments. We have a number of companies that have since launched competitive treatments to the one that we launched and developed there a couple of years back. So I think the question is, what's next for rare and precision cardiac medicine? And in our view, the AAV vector is the most efficient way to deliver genetic payloads to the heart. Lipid nanoparticles cannot access the cardiomyocyte. GalNAc, and so on are not able to deliver those kinds of payloads to the heart. So, for the moment, we think this is the most efficient way to treat, cardiac genetic disease. This may not always be the case. I think other, modalities, including non-viral, will emerge to treat genetic conditions of the heart. But, today Lexeo has two clinical stage programs that are moving rapidly in diseases of high unmet need. The first being in Friedreich's ataxia, where we're treating both the cardiac and neurologic symptoms of the disease, and the second being in arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. I think these are good examples of the potential of genetic medicines in cardiac disease. I'd expect that, the next wave of treatments will, redefine what it means to treat cardiac disease. And what I mean by that is, today we look at, for example, heart failure or HFpEF or HFrEF as one uniform, almost monolithic disease. But the belief is that as you look at the genetics that sit behind a disease like this, you may find that the genetics are a driver of the disease, similar to what we found in oncology. And so the therapeutic solutions mean breaking the disease into its genetic components and then applying, precision therapies to treat each of those, genetically driven components of a much broader disease. So I'd expect that cardiovascular disease ultimately looks a lot like oncology. We'll see a range of treatments to address these, genetically mediated cardiovascular conditions. I think AAV vectors and gene therapy will be the tip of the spear here. But I think we'll ultimately see other modalities emerge that will be in a position to treat cardiac disease. And we've done some preclinical work in non-viral, for example, RNA for treating cardiac disease, where we've formed a new company with two leading venture funds to continue to explore that pathway. So I think there's more to come on that front, but today our clinical stage programs are, I believe, really tip of the spear for the treatment of genetic diseases with gene therapy.
Nice. And just to delve into Lexeo's cardiology pipeline, so the two lead programs, so LX2006 and LX2020, targeting genetic forms of cardiomyopathy. Can you share more about these therapies, the specific conditions they're designed to treat, as well as the unmet clinical needs that they would address?
Yeah. So the most advanced program is treating Friedreich's ataxia. This is a multi-system disease. And what I mean by that is you would typically think of Friedreich's ataxia as a neurologic disease, and that's the ataxia component of it. This disease typically develops in childhood. These are patients that are 5, 8 years old. That the neurologic disease progresses typically until a form of cardiomyopathy emerges in adulthood. And it's this cardiomyopathy that's typically the cause of death for the majority of Friedreich's ataxia patients. And typically patients experience mortality in the third decade of life. So a therapeutic that can treat both the cause of mortality in this disease, which is cardiac, but can also have some benefit in the neurologic disease, is one that we believe would be highly valued by patients that are suffering from Friedreich's ataxia. So this therapy is designed to deliver a functional copy of the missing gene, which is frataxin. It expresses the functional protein. By re-expressing this frataxin protein, this has been shown to reverse the disease, cardiac disease pathology, in terms of reducing heart mass, which is the series of events that ultimately leads to heart failure. We've also shown some benefit in the neurologic component of the disease on certain Friedreich's ataxia functional scales. So this is a disease of high unmet need. There is an existing therapy, but this therapy only treats the neurologic component of the disease. It does not appear to have a benefit for the cardiac disease. So many patients will still die from this disease without a therapy like one that we're developing that can address the cardiac component. So we're excited about this therapy. It's moving rapidly into a registrational study. We'd hope to have data from this registrational study in 2027 and then be submitting a BLA thereafter. So I think it's not too distant that we could see an additional therapeutic option for patients with Friedreich's ataxia. The next most advanced program, as you mentioned, is treating arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. This is a very different disease pathology. It's a disease of life-threatening arrhythmias. Commonly, patients experience, sudden death from this disease. It's basically electrical conduction disorder. This disease is mediated by a deficiency and a mutation in the plakophilin-2 gene, which is the most common gene associated with arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. This gene mutation causes deficiency of the functional protein. We're restoring the genetics, and then the functional protein is expressed through that restoration. This has been seen in animal models to correct the disease pathology, reduce these life-threatening arrhythmic events, and address other symptoms of the disease. This is a relatively large, rare disease. It's about 60,000 patients in the U.S. So I think a therapeutic option that has a meaningful impact and the right safety profile could address a pretty significant cause of mortality and morbidity in this important cardiac disease. So these are the two therapies that we're developing. The second one, the arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy program, will have a data readout from our phase 1 study in the second half of this year.
Exciting. I know gene therapy has traditionally been applied to rare diseases, but Lexeo are applying this to cardiovascular conditions. What do you think makes the gene therapy space a promising strategy, and how does it compare to more traditional treatment approaches?
Well, I'd say first, these are both cardiac, but they're also rare, so the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. But I think importantly, historically, gene therapies have been applied to liver-mediated diseases. And so these were, for example, the hemophilia treatments. They've been applied to ocular diseases. So Luxturna, the commercially approved gene therapy, is eye disease, and then has been applied in the case of spinal muscular atrophy to a disease, to a neurologic disease. but it has not been applied, at least has not reached a commercial setting or late stage studies even into cardiac disease. And I think that's unique. And I think the heart is uniquely amenable to gene therapy in a few ways. One is that we have found the delivery system or the vector that can deliver a genetic payload to the heart, but do so at safe doses. And this is an important theme here, that we've been able to, at relatively low doses, for example, in our Friedreich's ataxia study, achieve a very meaningful effect size and improvement of cardiac hypertrophy and other symptoms of cardiomyopathy. Secondarily, it is actually, in one sense, almost ideal for the case of clinical trials, in that there are non-invasive biomarkers you can use to assess the progression or regression of cardiac disease. For example, cardiac MRI, echo. There's blood-based biomarkers like troponin that can evaluate cardiac cell death. So there's a number of non-invasive ways to evaluate disease progression. You can also take tissue samples of the heart, which you cannot necessarily do in the brain or the eye, for example. But importantly, then this is obviously the type of diseases that result in mortality, and cardiac disease is one of the leading causes of mortality, globally. And you can look at hospitalization. You can look at symptoms of heart failure, shortness of breath. I mean, there's a number of different and really meaningful clinical endpoints. In some cases, hard endpoints that you can evaluate. So I think we have a range of tools available to us when we're designing clinical trials that can allow us to rapidly advance these therapies through development. And as I mentioned earlier, the FDA is open to these biomarkers as accelerated approval endpoints. And so I think we will find ourselves in a place where we can begin to see the potential of precision or rare cardiac treatments through therapies like we're developing. I would expect others to begin to focus on this as well over time.
Yeah. And the cell and gene therapy field has experienced both significant breakthroughs as well as definitely some recent headwinds. What gives you confidence in cell and gene therapy's long-term potential?
It's a good question, and I think an important one right now. And I would make the case that every new novel modality, whether you look back at monoclonal antibodies, you look back at RNAi, all modalities kind of go through periods of excitement and investment and a lot of interest, and then may experience some setbacks as they move through clinical development, maybe early commercial, and I think the field begins to understand some of the challenges of the modality. And I think we've spent the last few years in gene therapy really understanding some of the limitations or challenges of the modality itself. And I think there are a few important things that we've learned. The first is that it appears that there is a limiting dose to gene therapy, meaning there's an upper end of how much of a virus, even of this non-pathogenic virus, that the human body can ultimately accept. Interestingly, and one of the challenges is that some of the diseases of highest unmet need require the highest genetic payloads to correct them. So for example, a disease like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, you're trying to correct the genetics of muscles. This is the largest organ in the human body. So you're really skating on the edge of what may be a safe dose for gene therapy relative to the need to correct the disease. But I believe if you were to ask a Duchenne's patient or the family of a Duchenne's patient, do you want the biotechnology industry to explore a therapeutic option, despite the fact that it will require a high dose of gene therapy, which may come with a risk-benefit profile that needs to be considered? I think most patients, most families would say absolutely, you should pursue a therapy for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, even at those doses. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we're seeing in the field, is that some of the diseases we're seeking to address are themselves just fundamentally life-threatening, and yet developing a therapeutic for them, while it may have some safety baggage tied to it, ultimately is going to have a very dramatic substantial positive benefit for patients that are treated with the therapy. Now, I think the nuance here is to find the right the right tool for the disease that we're seeking to treat. And I think that's an important theme here, is the evolution in the vector technology, the evolution in manufacturing technology, and so on, can allow us to be more precise in the tool that we choose to address the disease in question. And what we've been able to do in cardiac disease is find a capsid that has a high tropism profile, or let's say affinity for the heart. And that capsid then allows us to deliver this genetic payload, but do so at lower doses. And therefore we can do so, very safely. Safety in gene therapy is always related to dose. So when you see a higher dose gene therapy, you know that you're probably accepting some safety risk. But as the doses decrease, it's actually notable in the absence of safety events. For example, if you look at the hemophilia treatments or others at lower doses. So that's the key to the future of the field, is to find ways to treat the diseases of interest and of focus and of unmet need for society, but do so at lower doses. It's either reapplying existing vector technology in a different way, or there's a huge body of work in novel capsids or novel vectors that are seeking to find ways to deliver these genetic payloads at lower doses. So I would see that as the future of gene therapy. I think as we achieve that, we'll see the safety profile become something more appropriate even for larger diseases over time. And I think that's where the field is headed. So I think that's our point of view on this. Now, the other side of this all, and I talked about safety, but I mean the efficacy, the benefit to patients of gene therapy is almost undeniable. You see in sickle cell, you see in spinal muscular atrophy. I mean, in spinal muscular atrophy, this is a disease where life expectancy in SMA1 would typically be 2 or 3 years of age. There's patients being treated with the gene therapy that are kind of going on to live a normal life. I mean, this is an unheard of degree of scientific and clinical innovation that's being applied to a disease that ultimately would be very challenging for families and patients. So that's the potential of gene therapy. That's the potential that's still yet to be realized across a range of rare genetic diseases, but then potentially over time into other types of diseases. And I would note that because it's a correction of the genetics, you'd expect to see persistent expression of the gene therapy in most cases. And so these are typically one-time therapies. In some cases could be functional cures to the diseases that the companies or investigators are seeking to treat. So I think this is exactly what society wants from the biotechnology industry, is for us to deliver cures to diseases, to move away from treatments that a patient has to consume or take for the rest of their lives, to a single administration functional cure to a disease. This is what gene therapy can deliver to society over time. I just think we have to continue to work on the technology, optimize it. We'll have to continue to work to make it better. Today, I think it's a great technology to apply to a set of rare genetic diseases, but over time, I think we'll expand the number of diseases that we can treat, and we'll expand it potentially beyond even the rare disease context.
Yeah, very good. I think given today's evolving macroeconomic and regulatory environment, how are you adapting Lexeo's strategy to remain focused and agile while continue to advance key programs?
Yeah, I think the macroeconomic environment's an important one. Obviously the biotechnology market has been relatively stagnant, or from a public markets perspective, for a number of years now. I think what this means is that for companies like us, clinical stage companies, we're operating we have to access the capital markets at very, very high costs of capital. This means that the hurdle rate for the return on that capital is quite high. This means that we need to then focus on the programs with the highest probability of success, or the most attractive, market opportunity. That most attractive market opportunity would typically mean a disease that does not have an existing treatment ahead of it. So I think that's one of the important themes. It's the reason why we've really refocused our pipeline on our two, I'd say most advanced programs that we believe have the highest probabilities of success. What comes hand in hand with that is the regulatory landscape. There has been some volatility on that front in the recent months that I think most people have observed. This volatility, does find its way ultimately into the cost of capital. So as there's volatility and uncertainty on the regulatory front, then the cost of capital goes up, for companies. So I think it really comes down to focusing on what's most important, to focusing on what has the highest probability of success, and ultimately what delivers the most value for patients. And I think that's the strategy that we've taken. And, if you imagine a company that's gone from, potentially 18 programs down to, two clinical stage and then a couple that are preclinical, we've represented that focus that I think the capital markets have required over the last few years. But, we're really excited about the impact that we can have on diseases like Friedreich's ataxia. I mean, it's really exciting, even to get one drug through an approval. It's a long journey, but it's an exciting one. And ultimately to get there, and especially in a disease like Friedreich's ataxia, it would be a great accomplishment for Lexeo to get there in the next couple of years. And we're excited that we're on that path.
Very good. And what are the next major milestones for Lexeo? Are there any particular clinical or corporate developments on the horizon that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we have a data readout for our PKP2 arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy program. We have a number of patients that have been treated in our phase 1 study. So I think this will be the first, more comprehensive readout of clinical data for us for this program, but also just across the arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy field. I think it'll give a good sense of, the ability to treat this disease with gene therapy, and then ultimately the degree of impact that the therapy can have, and ultimately as well, the pathway for this therapy into its next study and hopefully towards an approval or an accelerated approval. We expect to have a data readout, the final data readout from our phase 1/2 study for Friedreich's ataxia in 2026. We're starting the registrational accelerated approval study for the Friedreich's ataxia program shortly. That study will have a data readout in mid-2027. So I think we have a pretty robust calendar of clinical data catalysts upcoming, and then on the other side of that, working towards the our first BLA for our Friedreich's ataxia program, which would hopefully be late 27 or 2028. So that's the path we're on. We're excited to be headed down that way. From a corporate development point of view, we have recently financed, and this gives us a runway into 2028. So this gives us a runway beyond the registrational study for the Friedreich's ataxia program. So I don't necessarily expect much on the financing or corporate development front in the near term, given we just completed a raise. And really we're just focused on executing and ensuring we're delivering these therapies for patients.
Yeah, and as a CEO, how do you think about building and sustaining a strong company culture? Like, are there any particular leadership values that are most important to you, and how do they shape the way that Lexeo operates and grows?
Yeah. So I think the first is we have a team at Lexeo that's very passionate about patients and in large part very passionate about treating some of the rare diseases that we're focused on. And I think, there's a good portion of the team that, for example, previously worked in the rare disease unit at Pfizer, and now they're here at Lexeo working on rare diseases. So you can see, a lot of them have, dedicated a good portion of their lives to developing or commercializing therapies for rare disease patients. So I think that passion for treating diseases of this profile is something that's important to the culture of the company. And I think, as a company, we've made a lot of progress over, 5 or 6 years. And I think that's a function of just, having bold ambitions for where we're going and how we can get there, and the timelines that we would take, or, we don't take any foregone conclusions or assumptions about what's possible. We try to, focus on and be creative into ways to get these therapies to patients faster, to do things more efficiently. And I think that level of, call it operational innovation, is important to the culture of Lexeo, and is what's allowed us to, in effectively 5 years, go from a Friedreich's ataxia study that was in murine studies or in studies in mice to one that's now in a registrational study. So I think that bold thinking, that the pace of how we work is important to the culture of Lexeo. But it also ultimately allows us to deliver treatments for patients faster. And I think that's, in my view, is exactly what a patient society should want from the biotechnology industry. We're unconstrained by red tape. We're unconstrained by, large corporate infrastructure. I mean, this is the value of what biotech can deliver as small, nimble organizations. And I think, Lexeo embodies that culture, bold thinking, a rapid pace. We have an undeterred culture. If we experience setbacks, we try to find ways around them. So that's the culture of Lexeo that's helped us to get to where we are today.
Nice. And this is a question that we always finish with on the BioHub, and I know I wanted to give you a bit of a heads up on this one, but if you were to have dinner with 3 people, past or present, who would they be and why? They don't necessarily need to be biotech innovators, although they can be if you like. But yeah, 3 people for dinner.
One would be Martin Luther King. I think he led a social movement that changed, social and political movement that changed the United States, and frankly may have changed other countries. And the sort of degree of leadership and thoughtfulness and the manner in which he executed that, I think was just very impressive. Obviously impactful for me as an African American person. So that's someone that I would like to have dinner with. I think another is, and this is probably an interesting one, but is Vladimir Putin, who's living today. I spent time as part of my prior work in Eastern Europe. I spent time living in Ukraine actually, and so I learned a lot about the culture in that region. I believe President Putin has designs, ambitions for what he believes the Eastern Europe region, or maybe Europe, should look like or should be structured as. I mean, it'd be just great for me to better understand his sort of geopolitical philosophy and thinking around how he believes the broader world order and Eastern Europe, maybe Europe itself, should be structured. And maybe out of that conversation is some thoughts about resolution to the conflict that we're seeing there. And lastly, in terms of a business leader, I have read a lot of the kind of former Jack Welch books, and his leadership style, the organization he was able to build. You see a lot of CEOs that have come out of the GE general management sort of HR system that Jack Welch built. And so there's really is something to that type of leadership and what he's been able to do, and sort of that legacy that he's left across many industries, and from his work at General Electric. So I think that's the range of individuals that I would be interested to have dinner with and learn from.
Yeah, I'm sure that'd be a super interesting dinner party for sure. So, yeah, look, thanks so much for helping us out with this, Lexeo. I think you've just given a really unique viewpoint of the company, the pipeline, and all of that, and certainly one I'm going to be following for sure in the future. So, yeah, Nolan, thanks again for helping us out with this.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.